Never surrender. Never surrender is what we're told, is the story we're told. That's what a great man is. A great man never surrenders. And in fact, in the polarity practices, when we explore masculine and feminine, right? Surrender is the quality of the feminine, not the masculine. So the feminine surrenders, the masculine never surrenders. The feminine surrenders, the masculine does not. And in that dance, in that moment, it can be wonderful because that creates conflict and tension between the two. For it to have one surrender and one not. If both were surrendering together, it would be kind of like, it would be very fluid, very flowy. It could feel good for a few minutes, but it's going to lose its sexual charge because the polarity won't be present. So to have one partner embodying this quality of never surrender and another surrendering, it's a beautiful art. It's a beautiful dance. But that's all it is. It's a game. It's a dynamic we play for a moment to create effect, just like telling a story or watching a movie, right? But we have to recognize the story is not the absolute truth. So if we live in ourselves and hold on to this idea of never surrender, can you see how just that idea and attitude automatically puts us at conflict with all of life? Never surrender. Never surrender to what? Anything. Anything. So you're at war with everything, eternally, forever, at war. And the arrogant man says, yes. A deep masculine inside of us says, yes, that's it. Never surrender. And we all watch the movies and we're like, yeah, never surrender. Again, William Wallace, Maximus, never surrender. And then they're dead, and that's their liberation, is death. But they never surrendered. So there's something beautiful about that. And I don't want to miss the gift inside of this, but there's a pitfall here. Because to never surrender is to cling on to this thing we call self that makes us feel separate, constantly frustrated with ourselves, with our intimate partners, and with the world. We feel this threat of us versus life. And because that threat is alive, because we're never surrendering, there is a fear that is chronic inside of us. As strong as we might become, it's only in reaction because we're afraid. As tough as we get, we're afraid. So as you could see, as we've moved through these 9 pitfalls, each one of them aggravates this conflict between masculine and feminine, between the I and me, between you as man and your woman as nature. And that conflict of two creates judgment, an internal experience of shame, an external experience of blame, an underlying experience of fear chronically and constantly feeling trapped and caged inside all of it. How many of you can relate to what I'm describing right now? Anyone know this experience? Understood unskillfully, understood only through the eyes of the ego, all of these conflicts are aggravated through masculine practice. There's no liberation at all. There's just greater and greater frustration in relationship to the feminine, that which you are not. Our work here in this practice is to end all conflict. Skillful practice, rightful practice does not aggravate conflict, it resolves them. The conflict within self, the conflict with other, and the conflict with world. A lot of people say they would love to see world peace and conflicts resolved, but they haven't even ended the war inside of themselves. If you can't end the conflict that's happening in you, how could you possibly expect anyone else to do it? Our work is to understand this conflict at the root level of mind, how we are at odds with ourselves, and end this shame cycle, and this cycle of judgment, the cycle of blame, and this cycle of misery. And when we finally surrender, we're surrendering the self. We are no longer self-conscious, we are just conscious. In summary of all of these 9 points, what I'd like everyone to notice, the theme carried throughout every single one of these, is a massive difference in 2 paradigms. And that's the difference between self-development and self-transcendence. When our focus is developing the super self, the strongest self, the most masculine self, the greatest self, very innocently and unknowingly, we perpetuate this conflict in all of the ways that I've named. Now, I'm not saying self-development is a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, if we believe the story to be true, we will suffer tremendously because we stay imprisoned in all of these paradigms, never actually understanding the truth, never capable of true unconditional love for self and other, never capable of knowing absolute true freedom as we are now in this present moment. All of it feels incredibly out of reach. And when we stop to recognize that's all we ever really wanted was just this degree of happiness, liberation. None of the other things could give it to us. So what we start to wake up to is that this thing called self is the actual obstruction. And the difference in each of these points that I've laid out today is when we start approaching these ideas from the view of self-transcendence. When our objective is to remove the obstacle that is self, to unwind this mechanism that creates judgment, shame, blame, and misery. So I know that this call may have created more questions than it did offer answers. But these are things for you to consider and to challenge the way you've been thinking about or understanding practice and to bring them into your life. And as you consider these things, notice what comes alive for you. Notice what becomes available to you as you start looking from this perspective, and maybe you can avoid some of the pitfalls that I had fallen in. Or maybe you don't have to sit at the bottom of the hole as long as I did.